Hello, everyone. Today, I will be walking you through the topic of my final paper, which deals with what aspects of democracy have the largest impact on civil war duration. As a brief introduction, uh, through the literature that I read and through what we've read in class, it was established that democracies are less likely to enter into civil conflicts to start with. But that doesn't mean that they don't happen. Many democracies throughout history have still entered into different forms of civil conflict. A main part that I wanted to study is duration. In democracies, while being less likely to enter into civil conflict in the first place, it is also shown that when they do, in fact, enter into such conflict, the duration of those conflicts tends to be much shorter than semi-democracies and autocracies. And I kept asking myself why. I never thought it was because of the term democracy or because of being a democracy as a whole. I always wanted to break it down into its sort of parts, or wondered what parts of being democratic leads to a shorter duration. Specifically, was it the institutions? Is it the fact that there's open elections or a strong leader? The way that equality is viewed or views towards human rights and civil liberties, policies that enacted, anything in between. I always wondered what part of being a democracy led to this decrease in duration of civil conflicts. Through studying the literature, I found that the idea of differing types of democracies is addressed but never fully explored. In numerous articles that I was able to find, the idea of differing types of democracies impacting violence and duration is talked about, but never fully delved into or explained. And I found that very interesting and just a noticeable piece of information that has been left out and that I wanted to explore more. Through the literature that I did read, things that were talked about were social equality, institution strength, state capacity, leader strength, state views towards violence, and so much more, were all shown to have major impacts on decreasing duration, decreasing scale of civil conflicts. But it was always shown in a large sense, combining multiple aspects or all the aspects of democracy, or comparing one aspect or studying one aspect and not comparing it to others. So I kept asking myself which aspect has the largest influence over decreasing duration of civil conflicts in democracies. The literature was so in depth. There was one that even talked about rebels being able to turn into political parties in open democracies, which would obviously end a civil conflict. But in my mind, what it comes down to is these outcomes being a result of the democratic process. And that instance, it's because the democracy itself is very open in terms of its political process and having an electoral openness. It was allowing the rebels to join the political process, but not all democracies would have that open of a process. Therefore, a openness of politics would be a aspect that could decrease duration of civil conflicts. For my personal theory and hypothesis, I wanted to look at a larger picture of what democracy symbolizes to citizens. And in my mind, people within these democratic states may be invigorated to fight to preserve democracy. In the way that I saw it, it was because they're preserving a way of life, an idea of what it means to be living in a democracy. The fact that you can always see your wants and desires reflected in the society around you with just enough effort. And while that may be far too much pull yourself up by the bootstraps, I think it is a mentality that still exists within people, maybe not in that individual of a sense, but the idea that you can move up, that you can find prosperity, that you can see your wants reflected in the society around you still exists. And if someone was to ever challenge that, say a rebel group, you would fight hard. In my mind, it would force people and make people fight very harshly and quickly to end that threat to their way of life, to their perception of their government, of the world around them. What I think plays into that and is very, very important, my hypothesis basically, is that if a state is able to provide social improvements and strong institutions to reinforce those improvements, it will significantly reduce the duration of any civil conflict that may occur. What I basically want to focus on is levels of inequality and qualitative samples of how people feel that their government is A, representative of their wants, but also giving them a quality standard of living. And if those are high, if the government meets people's wants, provides a high standard of living, has low levels of inequality, then people are more likely to fight to preserve that democratic idea than if inequality is rampant and the government isn't doing a good job of representing its people. In terms of research design, what I would first do is use the Polity 4 index to get a numerical representation of each state's level of democracy that is entered into a civil conflict, and then average the length of the civil conflict on country associated with each numerical evaluation of democracy. Basically, it gives you a baseline and a spectrum for duration. While you would expect to see a strong democracy 10 in the Polity Index have the lowest duration and a 1 have much higher, it's nice to see the variation among it. That way you can understand just how profound of an impact strength of democracy has in general. From there, you would look at each number itself, break down, say, a democracy that ranks as a 6 in the Polity 4 Index, and then use maybe the Gini coefficient and qualitative research to measure the citizens' interpretation of equality. You want to see if the citizens believe that their government is representing them, that they believe in human rights and civil liberties and are protecting them, that inequality is low, and that they're providing a decent standard of living. And if this is shown through the Gini coefficient and sort of qualitative research methods, you can show that if the country was doing a good job and was providing for its citizens, you would expect to see the duration of any civil conflict that was to break out in that country be much lower than in countries where inequality was rampant or the government wasn't doing a good job of providing for its citizens. So what you would then do is measure and see within each number on the Polity Index if a government or state was having a high Gini coefficient and not representing its people well. You would expect the duration to be much longer than a country where the Gini coefficient is low and the government is providing a decent standard of living. People are happy and seeing themselves represented. In my mind, this is extremely important and the most important factor of democracy, because those are the people that would fight to preserve their way of life, that would fight any sort of insurgents or rebel group that would challenge that idea of democracy. In conclusion, what I wanted to do with this paper is look at the more specific aspects of democracies that work to lower the duration of civil conflict. Previously, I had really only seen democracy used in this all-encompassing term that decreased all aspects of civil conflict, from duration to violence to scale to possible intervention. But I'd never seen it broken down into its different forms and addressed as how each individual aspect impacts duration. That had been on my mind ever since we read about democracies in the first place, and I hope that I was able to answer it in this paper, or at least try and find an answer for it in this paper, specifically by dealing with my hypothesis that relates social equality as a large motivating factor to get civilians to fight against any possible insurgents, and the need for strong democratic institution to bolster military actions. Those two combined, institutions backing up the ideal of social equality and citizen motivation, could be tested to see if they have the largest impact on duration, lowering it more than any other aspect that a democracy can provide for its citizens. In terms of practical application, if this were to be true, that social equality and strong democratic institutions decrease duration of civil conflict the most within democracies, these insights would be very helpful to any sort of new democracies or fringe democracies to know that they would implement these sort of changes to decrease duration of possible civil conflicts in the future. Thank you all for your time, and I will see you Tuesday.